Good day and welcome. Today I want to talk about the outcry from politicians across Europe after claims from Estonia that Russia's fighter jets incurred on its airspace. There's also been an increase in the number of threats to shoot down Russian fighter jets from some politicians in EU countries. Now, most analysts have rightly described the hostile rhetoric as excessive and inappropriate. And it also appears that all the claims of Russian fighter jets violating airspace have been found to actually be very inaccurate and unsubstantiated. Plus, what are the motivations of the EU and NATO's politicians for using such aggressive rhetoric? Well, in this video, I'm going to have a look at the background and the facts about what's occurred and how the hysterics of European politicians are obviously exaggerated. Now, on September the 22nd, the UN Security Council convened an extraordinary meeting to discuss the alleged violations of Estonian airspace by Russian fighter jets. Now, Dmitry Polyansky, Russia's deputy permanent representative to the UN, stated at the Security Council meeting that Estonia has no actual evidence of Russian aircraft violating its airspace. According to the diplomat, Tallinn's accusations lack factual evidence to support their claims and are indicative of the Russophobic hysteria. He said, "Our neighbours are now convinced that Russia was responsible for a violation of their airspace. As always, they present no actual evidence other than that Russophobic hysteria, which our Estonian colleagues vividly demonstrate." Now, last Friday, the Estonian Prime Minister, Kristen Michael, announced that the alleged incursion by 3 Russian MiG-31s into Estonian airspace and she stated that the aircraft remained in Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. Now, following this, the Russian Charge of Affairs was summoned to a meeting at the Estonian Foreign Ministry. That must have been fun. Meanwhile, the Russian Ministry of Defense stated that the flights were conducted in strict compliance with international airspace regulations and did not violate the borders of any other states. He said the fighter jets were flying from Karelia to the Kaliningrad region and their route took them over neutral waters in the Baltic Sea. Now, before I continue, many of you watching do not subscribe. So please hit the subscribe button and join our community. Hit the alert bell so you get notified when I post a new video. And if you want to support me, you can make a donation by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the screen or by using the Buy Me a Coffee link below in the credits. Now, despite this statement by the Russians, European countries have continued to escalate their rhetoric, with the Czech President Petr Pavel calling on NATO to respond in an appropriate manner to the threat posed by Russia. He stated that airspace violations are ground for activating defence mechanisms and shooting down some aircraft in the future. Well, good luck with that, Peter. Let's see how that ends up. Yeah, another of the Chihuahuas, a Central European rather than a Baltic Chihuahua at that. Now, another Chihuahua, the Gordon Hart, the foreign policy spokesman for the Christian Democratic Union faction in the German Bundestag, has a similar opinion. He emphasised that the alliance's full military potential must be used to respond to Moscow's threats. Now, that's funny, as we've seen the full extent of NATO's military action in Ukraine, and it's not exactly impressive now, is it? Now, also in response to the incident, the Lithuanian Minister of Defence, a clown called Dovile Sakhalin, invoked the Turkish example of 10 years ago in reference to the shooting down of a Russian Su-24 bomber in 2015 at the Turkey-Syria border. However, the clown at the head of the Lithuanian ministry forgot that the Turkish President Recep Erdogan profusely apologised to the Russian leadership for the incident, promised it was not a planned attack by the Turkish government, and those responsible for the shooting down of the Russian plane were going to be punished. Therefore, it would appear that Europe is a party that's not actually in a constructive mood at the moment. During the recent alleged Russian drone flight over Poland, which Moscow was also blamed, after which the Russian Ministry of Defence proposed joint consultations. However, the Poles, as usual, did not respond positively, a bit like the 2 farmers who were killed back in 2022. Instead, their clown of a foreign minister, Radoslaw Trzaskowski, warned that if debris from a Russian aircraft violating Polish airspace is shot down over NATO territory, Russia should not complain to the EU. Sikorsky, by the way, is married to the deranged Russophobe neocon journalist Anne Applebaum, who is also a good friend of Victoria Fuck the EU Nuland, who was one of the organisers of the Maidan coup in Kiev in 2014. So you can understand they're not exactly rational people. Meanwhile, the leadership of the EU is partly responsible for escalating the situation in the Baltic Sea. Back in May, Estonian authorities attempted to detain a Gabonese flagged tanker in international waters that was heading to Russia. Now, it's not just Tallinn that's doing this. I mean, in late December last year, Finland detained the Cook Islands flagged tanker heading to Russia on suspicion of damaging the Est-Link submarine cable. And let's not also forget that the head of foreign relations of the European Commission is Kaja Kallas, the Russophobic ex-Prime Minister of Estonia. Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense has already provided a comprehensive explanation of the circumstances surrounding the flight of the fighter jets near Estonia. Now, the aircraft's movements were in accordance with international law. Moreover, the corridor for possible movement in the area of the alleged violation is narrowed just 3 kilometres, said military analyst Alexei Apelgov. Accordingly, it can be assumed that Tallinn received incorrect information from its radars. These type of technologies are not immune to glitches, and it's imperative to acknowledge the complexity inherent in calculating territorial borders and boundaries of states. I mean, it's subject to significant differences in interpretation among different countries. Plus, movement in airspace and its tracking is physically different from movement on land or sea. I mean, due to technical and navigational limitations, it's frequently impractical to determine an aircraft's location with absolute precision at any given moment. So it's important to note that the designated flight corridor for normal civil aviation is 10 kilometres wide. The Baltic Sea's neutral waters and the airspace within this section of the Baltic measures a mere 3 kilometres. So even if we assume that the Russian fighters did, by some accident, enter Estonian airspace, it would certainly possibly be an accident due to strong winds. Now, the violation map published by the Estonian authorities clearly shows that the aircraft allegedly entered the country's border tangentially and proceeded towards Kaliningrad rather than deliberately entering Estonian territory. Therefore, it's not possible to refer to that as an incursion, but at best a navigational error. Now, this is particularly relevant for the Estonian side, given that radars are unable to determine the exact location of an aircraft in air with the required level of accuracy. It's also important to note that the Baltic states have been making similar accusations against Russian aircraft for many years. I mean, for example, they've alleged that Russian aircraft fly across their borders without transponders on, and this has been the case for at least 6 years. Analysts emphasised it was the Estonian side that was undermining any potential agreements or contacts with Russia on this matter. Now, back in 2018, Estonia lodged similar claims against an aircraft carrying Russia's leadership onto Kaliningrad. Plus, back in 2016, Russia proposed to NATO that the activation of transponders during military flights of the Baltic be done, but the alliance did not accept it. So it's crucial to understand that the onus is on the prosecution to provide evidence. And it appears that Europe's not actually prepared to have a constructive discussion on this issue because it doesn't have the evidence. I mean, this is the basis for the claims regarding its alleged readiness to shoot down Russian aircraft. Now, it's also evident that the EU will not seek open conflict. I mean, it appears highly probable that the European Union is attempting to establish the foundation for an escalation of the blockade of the Kaliningrad region of Russia, in addition to tightening measures against ships flying third country flags, which are part of Russia's shadow oil fleet. I mean, Brussels is always trying to provoke Moscow, but it actually lacks the courage to go for a fully fledged conflict, and a marked increase in dialogue with Russia on such far-fetched pretexts assists the states of the EU in resolving their own internal problems. Now, Vladimir Kozylin, who's head of the Institute of International Law and Policy at the Diplomatic Academy of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he says in Germany, for example, more than half the country doesn't support Berlin's current policy towards Ukraine or towards Russia. And there's a growing distrust of the government, not only in Germany, but all over Europe. So there is why European leaders are taking every opportunity to try and escalate a conflict with Russia as a pretext as bold and decisive action. He goes on to explain that the threat from Russia has been used as a rationale for the reduction in their social welfare benefits and the redistribution of funds to meet military needs. Now, the same theme was used to justify the deployment of American missiles in Germany. The conversion of civilian logistics to meet defence needs has now become the norm. Now, the trend towards the militarisation of Europe, which began back in 2022, has continued ever since. And it's evident that constructive dialogue cannot be established with them in such circumstances. Ultimately, there's a possibility that the EU will continue their aggression. Their states are not committed to diplomacy, and if they were, they wouldn't shout the need to shoot down other countries' planes. Now, they're excessive and inappropriate hostility, so we shall see what happens, but as usual, it's another false flag. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.